Good afternoon, boys and girls. This is Genvièv, and you are on Genvièv TV, your channel for forensic and clinical education. And today I come to you live with a very heavy heart and deep sorrow as I was just made aware of the loss of my longest time client, student, and somebody who had been working with me for a whole decade. And since apparently there's not going to be any sort of memorial that we know of because her family is not, is estranged from her, I thought I would go live today to honor her memory. And for the sake of confidentiality, I'm going to give her a false name for this episode, talking about her. And we're going to call her Athena because Athena was the Greek goddess of wisdom. And that's how I always saw her, as a divinity, a being of such incredible light and incredible wisdom and incredible uniqueness. So I want to share with you a little bit how we got to know each other. She came to see me a full decade ago. Actually, I was contacted first by her medical team, her mental health providers, her social workers, her helpers, who contacted me and almost begged me to consider working with her, saying that she had been rejected by so many other providers because, and practitioners in general, because of her personality and her diagnosis, and the fact that she was very hard to understand for those who didn't know her. So initially, I agreed to do a consultation with her, and she was brought to me by her team of social workers and mental health providers with a very heavy diagnostic. Basically, I was given a sheet. Hello, Liane. Thank you for joining. It's so nice to see you here. I have a beautiful story I'm sharing with all of you today with a very heavy heart. And I just couldn't let her beautiful personality not be recognized. So this is my way of paying my homage, as we say in French, to this absolutely incredible being who has shared my life for the last 10 years. So she was initially brought to me with this thick dossier, this file with all these diagnoses, medical diagnoses of, thank you, thank you, Leanne. So I'm going to tell you a bit about the diagnosis here. She had been diagnosed with cerebral palsy, mental retardation, multiple personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder, borderline personality disorder, PTSD, post-traumatic stress, complex post-traumatic stress. She had some conduct disorder charges, and they were asking me to work with her. Her goal in working with me, she stated to her medical team, was to integrate her different personalities. And when she arrived for the first time to my first, she followed me 3 different locations in the last decade. My first location was upstairs, and she was brought by her medical team upstairs to me. She was actually, at that time back then, pushing a walker completely curled forward. She wouldn't look up. She would never raise her head. She looked disformed and curled over her walker and would only glance at you like this and look right back. She was extremely traumatized, a very severe history of trauma, multiple attacks on her since she was a very little girl. So carrying heavy trauma sequels, and terrified of interacting with anybody, terrified of interacting, terrified of others, terrified of talking to people, of interacting with people. When I first met her, I couldn't understand her. Her only communication came out as loud bursts of, it sounded like almost screams, bursts of shouting that didn't seem to be recognizable as words. So her social workers were there with her, translating, if you will, her communication with me. And when we did the consultation and even the first session, they were there with her. So I'm not going to go over the details of that decade-long work with her. I'll just give you the basic lines. My first initial contact with her, she was dressed in basically homeless type of clothing, very dirty, very soiled, very strong odors coming out of her, almost very difficult for anybody to be around, and completely curled forward, sort of pushing some seated walker apparatus, and just bursting sounds, and not even looking at you, just hiding and glancing very briefly and hiding. She wouldn't look at mirrors either, and I'm smiling because we did such incredible work. So over the course of so the first consultation and the first session, I asked the medical team to stay with me during the session so we could understand each other. And we found out very rapidly that within the first consultation and session, the first 2 visits, we were able to start understanding each other. She certainly understood me. I just had more of an issue worrying about not understanding her, but I found out really rapidly. And those of you who know hypnosis, we've seen that so many times, that when we go into the state of hypnosis, basically what it is an altered state of awareness where all of the stress, all of the tension, all of those distractions float away, and we become very grounded, we become very centered. And in that state, we're much more capable of accessing a higher awareness. Of all of my students taking exams excel because they place themselves in that state during that exam, during their exams, during their tests, during their contest, and they're able to access so much more information that they would otherwise have access to simply by grounding themselves in that state. And it sort of elevates our spirit, allows our soul to expand. And very often I work with no scripts. I've been doing this my entire life, as those of you who know me know. I was already hypnotizing classmates as a child when I was in my teens. So I don't follow a recipe. I've integrated the formula, the knowledge, so to speak. I've expanded it so much, working with so many brilliant people all over the world my entire life. So do you hear the thunder? I hope you hear this. I'm going to be quiet for a moment so you can hear the thunder. It's so beautiful. I love storms, and we're lucky today, once again, pouring rain, thunder, magnificent, refreshing weather. So in that state, so many of my students and clients, those who work with me, tell me, how did you know to speak with me, to speak to me in the way that you did during the session? You seem to reflect my thoughts, or I was thinking about this, and you enunciated it just seconds later. And we have so many examples that in that state, we access a higher level of consciousness, of sensitivity, sensibility, intuition, and we almost hear each other's thoughts. So of course, within the first 2 visits, we were able to sink into that understanding of each other. And from that point forward, her medical team would bring her to their sessions, and she preferred the confidentiality of working with me alone, and they would pick her up after the sessions. And so within weeks, she began to uncurl and open her body. And I spent a long time teaching her to look at me in the eyes, to raise, to begin to lift her chin, uncurl her body, and develop the courage to actually look at me eye to eye. And so the transformation was such, she came to see me almost unrecognizable as a human, curled up, shouting loud noises and hiding from people and terrified of people. When we moved to my next center, which was my beautiful clinical center in Lake Oswego, and I had 3 people at the front reception. It was a magnificent building. She initially would bolt from the elevator if somebody would come in, and then would insist on taking the elevator alone, and then would sit in the waiting room, and if somebody else would come in the waiting room, she would leave the waiting room. And so that was the beginning where I started working with her, and eventually we did so much work on her posture as well. We, of course, addressing, so the multiple personalities, by the way, such a classic example of what I think is misdiagnosis from people not understanding. What they were basically were simply coping mechanisms, allowing her to protect herself from her fears. And the moment we addressed her fears, I mean, in the 10 years I've worked with her, I've only seen one personality, and that was her. And I'm going to call her Athena here, not to reveal her real name, but it was, I would call her my lady, because I always looked at her when I began to realize the magnificence of her spirit, her, wow, I have no words. I mean, this person had such a beautiful, magnificent soul, wise and funny and full of feist and full of personality. Her humor, I mean, we would laugh to tears together. And her intelligence above and beyond the norm. She would be able to almost read your thoughts at any moment in time. Nobody could tell this woman a lie. Nobody. She knew exactly whether they were with her or at a distance on the phone. If somebody was trying to pull a quick one on her, she would know. One time, a taxi cab came to pick her up to collect her because she had asked for transportation. That's why I called her my lady. She had this staff working for her too. She was like a celebrity with her entourage. And the taxi cab driver was a bit of a New York style feisty person, and she literally almost set him on fire with her voice, with her feist. And he came back up the stairs when I was at my clinical center in Lake Oswego, complained to my staff loud enough so that I would be, they came to get me, and made a scandal that she wouldn't get in the car with her. And I looked at him and I started laughing, because I said, I'm not surprised with this kind of attitude. She's not going to get in a car with you. And he had to be sent back, and she actually had called the company to complain through her staff again, and send another driver. So that's just to show her she had so much feist in her, and personality and humor. And what they had labeled in their papers as multiple personality disorder was simply her masks that she was carrying to protect herself. With her sense of humor, she had everybody going. It was just hilarious. So over the course of the years that we were together, and the transformation happened very, very fast. I first of all worked on her fears and helped separate the traumas from the past to her adult age. And she was the same year as me. We were born in the same exact year, so she was an adult woman. I was able to help her separate the past and put it back in the past, so she would know that her personality of today was safe. With her feist and her wisdom and her intelligence and her intuition, she certainly could see trouble coming far away. But I explained to her that in order to see trouble coming, you had to uncurl your body, and you had to look up above and scan the horizon. That was the number one criterion for safety, basically. Let me see, my computer is falling asleep on me, I think, maybe. There we go. And so eventually we played in posture and walking, and she eventually let go of her walker that she was curled over when she initially came to see me. And in my first center in over a lake that I was in initially before the Lake Oswego location, we would pace back and forth. We had this really long main room, and I had her imagine she was wearing those ruffle collars from the medieval time. You've probably seen those in pictures or drawings. You remember those medieval times lady that were wearing those very thick collars that would keep your head up high, and nothing you could do to bring your head down. And that's how we worked together with imagery to help her uncurl her body and keep her chin up. And then I taught her to look in my eyes firstly, and then we worked with a mirror. She couldn't see her image, typical repercussion. And I've had this issue myself for most of my life. When you are attacked and when you are debased very early on in life, and taught that you're ugly and that no one and nothing will ever find you even tolerable to see, you learn to just basically develop body dysmorphia and learn to hide yourself from your image because you're so ashamed of yourself. And she had that as well. And so we worked together at allowing her to be able to look at herself in a mirror And that took some time. That took some time to be able to accept her own image. And literally, you know, over the course of a few years, she would arrive at my center in Lake Oswego wearing athletic clothes, no walkers, being dropped off by transport, whether it was her medical team, her coordinators, or sometimes taxi cabs, or sometimes bus. I mean, she would be so autonomous, and you know, various types of transformation, wearing athletic clothes like an athlete, little tennis shoes, and well dressed, smelling good. What an absolute transformation from the the being that had come to see me initially, hidden under layers and layers of dirty clothing and soiled garments, and with very strong scent, and hiding almost. And she would sometimes cover herself with balloons too, helium balloons, so that it would put extra layers between herself and others, and looking as much as she could, almost like a monster, to keep people away, you know. And the transformation of her within, you know, a period of time, just showing up with athletic clothes, no walker, beautifully dressed, and being able to sit and occasionally sit in my, I'm interrupting myself because the image keeps flooding my mind of going to collect her in the waiting room of my center, because after my staff had told me that she was there, and finding her in conversations with total strangers, sitting around a chess game, sipping her little hot drink that we offered my guests at my clinical center in Lake Oswego. In fact, she would come for the whole day. When she had one session with me, she would arrive early in the morning and stay until after everybody had left. Sometimes I left before her. She would stay at the very, very latest she could. And it made me so happy, because this is a beautiful center. So I was so happy to be able to offer her this comfort and sort of VIP setting with beautiful living rooms and lounges and study rooms and kitchen and a full bar of warm beverages, from hot chocolate to teas and coffees and whatnot, that she could have full access to it at no extra charge. So she would stay the whole day when I was in that center, and engage in conversation with some of my colleagues and some of my guests. It's just absolutely miraculous. One of her team members later posted a testimonials on one of my forums out there on the web, saying that the transformation in her patient was absolutely stupefying, that she could now live a life that was worth living. And so we continued working together over the years. And one of the things that I want to share with you, because it was so absolutely startling, is her wisdom in so many different directions was so extensive that in one of the sessions that we worked together, so she would show up with her goals for the day and ask me what she wanted to work with, whether it was increase her comfort around others, or really stress or anger, or this or that she was feeling at that moment in time in her life. We found that she had developed some strong fears and trust issues, obviously, as all of us trauma survivors typically have. And so she liked to continue her sessions with me, because it was that sort of stability that she felt and could exchange with me, and her thoughts and ideas. And so we would go into that state of hypnosis together to release whatever limitations she was feeling at that moment in time. And all of a sudden, through the course of our work together, when she was in that depth of hypnosis, she began to suddenly, I almost want to say blurt out, but suddenly release messages for me, which had absolutely nothing to do with her, and about subject that she knew nothing about, because those who work with me, and especially her, she didn't have internet access, so she wasn't on my Facebook page or following me anywhere. She didn't even know how to access the internet. In fact, when she was wanting to find things, she often asked me or her other members of her medical and support team to do the research for her. And so one time in session, it was years and years ago, she was in the depth of hypnosis, and I was working on releasing whatever obstacle she was wanting to work with. And all of a sudden, she interrupts me from that state of hypnosis with a very strong voice, telling me, "Your grandmother is wanting me to tell you something." and it startled me. My grandmother on my mother's side was a very, very close friend of mine. I mean, I lived together with her for years in Paris, where she resided, and we became best friends. She was my best friend. She was very feisty, very sharp, super intelligent woman, very educated, beautiful, so healthy. She lived until her late 90s in perfect health, mentally, physically, emotionally, every possible way. And she lived through the war, and so anyways, I suffered the loss of my grandmother very deeply, and I missed her, very, very deeply. In fact, I was a bit angry at her, to be honest with you, for dying and not even saying goodbye to me. You hear sometimes that people who have just died come into your dreams and have a message for you. And I had not had that when she died. And I almost felt betrayed. Like she left and didn't even bother to say goodbye after we were so close for such a big part of my life. When I was doing my studies in Paris, in my early 20s, I lived with her, and we shared so much. We were best friends, literally. And so anyways, in one of her sessions, this wonderful student client of mine, in the midst of hypnosis, suddenly blurts out, "Your grandmother has a message for you, and she wants me to tell it to you right away." And I reacted very strongly, almost with anger. I said, "What did you just say?" And she was still in the state of hypnosis. I was so shocked. I thought, did I hear her wrong? And she repeated to me, "I'm sorry, Genviève, but your grandmother is asking me to give you a message." And she continued on. I didn't have a choice whether to say no or not. And she told me, "Your grandmother," and she began to describe my grandmother, and absolutely to the T, verbatim. She described my grandmother physically, emotionally, her personality, everything perfect. Which there was no depiction of my grandmother in my office in Lake Oswego whatsoever. And she said, "Your grandmother is asking me to tell you that you need to leave the man that you are living with right now because he is dangerous." That was many, many years ago, right? And I was so upset because my grandmother was truly the only reason why I was with this man, because shortly before she died, I had sent her a picture of me with him. And in all of my life, my grandmother had never approved of the masculine friends that I would present to her, whoever they were. They were, in her eye, she had a very high opinion of me. And in her eye, they were never good enough for me. And then I sent her a picture of this person, and I already lived in America, so she never met him in person, but I sent her a picture in a Christmas card one year of the two of us together. And she told my mother, "I am so happy that Genviève finally found the one that makes me happy." And my mom asked my grandmother, "What did she tell you?" And my grandmother said, "Nothing. She just sent me a picture and I just know." And she died right after the fact. So that to me was where my grandmother's famous last words, so to speak, although her actual last words was to my mother, and I didn't know my grandmother had fallen and broken her hip. Nobody had told me, so I didn't know she was in a state of critical emergency. And she told my mother, "Please tell Genviève how much I would have loved to say goodbye to her." So these were actually her famous last words. But the ones that really marked me was her saying that about this man who later I trusted because of my grandmother's words, and turned out to literally obliterate my path, my career, and almost ended my life. And that is in my videos on my YouTube channel. If you go back to, he said I would die and I lived. So that's a video that's there. And so when my grandmother comes back from the other world, so to speak, through the voice of one of my cherished clients, to tell me, "You need to leave this man," I said, "You tell my grandmother not to interrupt our sessions, because she is the reason why I am with this man. And I am trying very hard to find a way out of the entrapment, economic entrapment he had literally built around me." at that time. And so that started this way of her in her sessions, in the middle of hypnosis, working on her, blurting out messages. Occasionally she would call me, leave a message on my voicemail saying, I know you told your grandmother to walk away and not interrupt our sessions, but she has another message for you. And it was so incredible. It was almost like reliving the book Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian Weiss in the 90s, who he was a psychiatrist, Mount Sinai Hospital in Florida, I believe, and in the process of using hypnosis as a test, because that he was not a hypnotherapist but a psychiatrist, if I'm correct, attempting hypnotherapy because nothing else had worked with his client, which, by the way, turned out to be the perfect solution and allowed her to be able to resolve her problem, which was that client of his couldn't swallow water, so that she couldn't take medication. And hypnosis allowed her to get over that fear, like it does for almost everything that other modalities struggle with. And then in the process of those sessions with Brian Weiss, her doctor, her physician, she too began to relay messages from the other world, from his son who had died in infancy. And he thought she had somehow done some research and found, and couldn't believe how she knew that. And in the end, he had no other choice but to believe, because the messages were so clear. And so that created that incredible fascination for regression hypnosis back in those days. And so I experienced the same thing with her. In her sessions, bringing such beautiful wisdom for herself, for me, for the world in general. And she was in excellent health. There was nothing wrong physically with her. The last session, her and I had, I almost said you, as if she were watching me right now, which she probably is. Earlier today, I was driving around right after hearing the news and being so dropped by the devastation of that news. And saw almost her smile and her eyes twinkling at me. Neither her or I had ever been afraid of death. We always see that as not an end, but a transformation into most likely an easier place, because we always say living is what's hard. And so we had this very similar philosophy about death not being an end. And as I was driving, I just got a flash of her smile and her eyes just full of wonder and twinkles and just smiling at me. That doesn't help us who stay behind with the loss. But so a couple of weeks ago, I had a session with her, and as regular, and except that now with COVID, we're doing this remotely. And in her case, because she doesn't have internet access, we were doing this with phone. And we had a beautiful session. As always, she ended up giggling, laughing like a little girl, full of joy. And she was walking in the woods, so she was very healthy. Absolutely zero reason for any of us, part of her team, to be concerned in any way, shape, or form. She was in happy spirits. She was, of course, concerned about the riots and all of that we've been experiencing here in Oregon and in most of America, actually, and staying healthy and safe from COVID-19. But she was in very good spirits and strong. So the team, her team members, who kindly reached out to me this morning to say that she hadn't responded, so she missed her session last week with me, which didn't happen. I mean, it happened once in the last multiple years, because she mixed the days together. And that was understandable, because she no longer had a driver coordinating to come to take her with me. So it was left to her, which with her incredible memory shouldn't have been an issue. But, with the stress that were going on, it's understandable. So she, in all of the years, how when you are of service to others, there are people who make appointments with you and don't even show up. And she was never like this. She was so reliable, so dependable, such high qualities of character, honor, integrity, magnificence, absolute magnificence. And she called me her friend, my friend. When she called me, she says, "Genvièv, my friend, I have a message." And so she missed her session last week, and we were concerned. And I immediately reached out to her team, and they told me that she wouldn't respond to the door, but they heard her, and she just didn't want to see anybody that week. And occasionally, you know, with her feisty temper, she would do that to her helpers. Occasionally, it's happened very often. Not that for her to miss sessions was very rare, and especially with no warning. That was. I want to say it just happened that one time 2 weeks ago, which is why I worried, and they kept in touch with her, and they just found out basically today that she had passed away. We don't know why, how, because she was healthy. So we may find more later, but it has left me with this huge sense of almost speechless loss, because she was such a big part of my life. You know, she had become such a beautiful part of my life, and that's the gift of working with others. And you know, those that you remember at the first day, you think, I don't know if I'm going to be able to help this person. There are those who you see and you think, oh yeah, that's going to be easy, I know I can be of help to them. And sometimes these, you know, surprise you by the fact that they're not actually responding in with the ease that you know, you thought they would. They might just not even show up for session. And those sometimes who you feel the most reluctant, because not being able to understand her the first day, I told her immediately, her support team, I'm not sure if I am able to work with her. And it turned out that it was the most incredible, beautiful experience that, you know, I mean, I often say when you work in hypnosis, you work in the day-to-day witnessing of miracles, because you access the force that is all around and within, and you see magnificent, magnificent transformation. But she was certainly one of the most incredible, speechless. It's impossible to describe having somebody come to see you in the state she was, and then uncurl and be able to interact with the world and become so magnificently interactive, and develop a relationship with me that was so beautiful and rich and magnificent. Wow, what an honor. You know, I bowed to her when she came in. I would bow and say, my lady, what an honor it is to work with you. And she would giggle, and I would escort her out to find her medical team again and waiting for her, and bow again and say, my lady, have a lovely week. It was such, I really cherished my time with her, and I wanted to honor her memory. I am stupefied that she's not going to be with us in the flesh anymore, and I'm going to miss her so much. So I wanted to, before I collapse into complete disintegration here, I wanted to read you the last words she said to me in her last sessions 2 weeks ago, because through the course of our work together, we came up with songs and poetry, and that we that we just came up together with our creativity during the sessions to work on her specific goals. And one of them I'll never forget was take the best, let go of the rest. And I told her, I'm going to write a book and we should write it together, and I'm going to name the book Take the Best, Let Go of the Rest, and include all of the beautiful poetry and messages from above that we've received during our sessions. And they're so she believed in receiving messages. For her, it was from Buddha. She believed, she was very close in her heart to the energy of Buddha, and she really believed that the messages were coming from him, although sometimes she would tell me, these are for you, they come from Christ. Or from my grandmother, or from, you know. And we came up with these songs and these refrains and these rhymes that, so I'm an author, I'm a writer, I'm a poet. I've released a poetry anthology of poetry years ago, so it may come easier to me. And she was so much in tune with these beautiful sentences. And so last session we had together was 2 weeks ago. And at the end of the session, as I was rescheduling her, and we were talking about transportation and times and all of that, so she was out of hypnosis, she started telling me, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder who you are. Twinkle, twinkle, come to me, here and now, just be. Here and now, just be. When the moment comes, it shall be, here and now, back to me. Here and now, I trust my body, here and now, not to worry. The past is gone, not to worry. I trust my body, let it be. Pray, meditate, look at the beauty all around, and always look forward, don't look back. Keep your head held high, here and now, over the top, here and now. Thank you. And so these were her last words to me before, and after we wrapped her session, before I escorted her out. And I reviewed her chart today to look at the last words she gave to me. And I'm typing when she's speaking with me, especially. I always take notes of everything, and I loved keeping notes of her thoughts and beautiful wisdom. So there you go, my friends. I'm going to wrap this today in her memory, and thanking the forces out there that gave me the incredible honor to be working with this beautiful being who will be so missed in this world. Oh, and before I wrap, because I'm completely collapsing, I want to grab something that was sent to me by somebody else that just this week, and I want to say thank you so much for your beautiful card. That's, you see, I have a little dog called Olivier Jacques, and that's definitely a depiction of Olivier Jacques. So thank you for sending this to me. That comes from another wonderful lady I cherish very much, who tells me, "Dear Genviève, I love your videos on YouTube. I'm so glad to see you doing well, and I hope to set up some sessions soon." And that came to me just yesterday in the mail. It's so sweet. So I wanted to acknowledge it and say thank you. And so totally impromptu video today. I wasn't thinking of coming live on camera, but having received that loss, I just had to share with all of you the memory of this beautiful being who's now back into the light and freed from the limitation of the human body, and safe and free to soar. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and I will see you soon again. Have a beautiful week, and cherish the ones that you love, because as you know, a lot of us are losing many people in these difficult times for many reasons, and so cherish them while you can. Thank you, everybody. See you soon. Ciao, ciao.